50 years after the March on Washington, the words of Martin Luther King Jr. still resonate today. Earlier, I had the chance to speak with Clayborne Carson. He was at the march 50 years ago and is now the director of the Dr. King Papers Project, a long-term effort to publish Dr. King's papers and his speeches. I asked him if he thought that more people today are embracing Dr. King's message.
I think that sometimes Martin Luther King gets reduced to the soundbite. Everyone's heard the "I have a dream" refrain, but not very many Americans have actually listened to the complete speech, much less any other speeches that Martin Luther King gave. And there was so much to his life. I think he's a symbol of a much larger movement, and I wish people knew more about that.
You were in the Washington Mall today. You said perhaps a couple of 100,000 people. When you looked out there, you saw a lot more women than you did 50 years ago, a lot more Hispanic faces. I can see it in your face right now. You're very bolstered by what happened out there today.
Well, I think that that's when Martin Luther King is really appreciated. You know, he was not, when he's described as a black civil rights leader, that's true, but that limits him in terms of his impact on American society. I think of him as a human rights leader on the scale of Gandhi, for example. And we don't necessarily think of Gandhi simply as an Indian independence fighter. You know, that was one of his roles, but his other role was to be a symbol and an advocate for human rights on a global scale, and that's Martin Luther King.
Here's the question I'm sure that you've prepared for, that everyone's asking you. What would Dr. King say today? Would he be happy where we are?
It's a mixed, I think, answer to that, because obviously he would be, when he came here 50 years ago, and I was there and watched him give that great speech, we were powerless people at one end of the mall, looking down at the other end of the mall where the Capitol and the White House, and recognizing that we had very little power there. I think at that point there were only 5 black people in all of Congress, no one in the White House, no one in the Supreme Court. And so to think after 50 years, when I came here for the inauguration of President Obama, and I saw many of the people I had seen at the other end of the mall, now down at the Capitol, on the steps of the Capitol, in positions of power and authority, and you know, that was a tremendous change. And I think the end of the Jim Crow system was a tremendous change. But we still have some serious problems.
Yeah, you say an end to the Jim Crow situation, but a big step back this year by virtually all accounts. When you lose significant parts of the Voting Rights Act that so many people fought and bled for, that can't be good.
Well, you don't want to be playing defensive battles all the time, and that's always a discouraging sign when you have to defend something that you thought was already won. But I think, having said that, we did win a tremendous victory in 1965, and other parts of that act are still in place. And I think ultimately the act is going to be reaffirmed, not in the courts, not in Congress, but by people going out and voting, regardless of what the obstacles are. I think there is the opportunity for people to go out and use voting as voting is one of the best nonviolent tools around.
Sure.
And I think that right now, for example, with respect to attempts to restrict voting, the way to end those kinds of attempts is to punish the party that does it. Any party that tries to win an election through suppressing the vote should be punished at the polls by not just black Americans, but any American who understands that that's just not the way democracy should work.
Who carries the mantle nowadays? Back in 1963, it was clear. Dr. King, such an eloquent spokesman. Who leads now? I mean, we have Barack Obama in the White House, but is he who African Americans, who the United States look up to for civil rights, for human rights?
I think there's someone on the scene. We might not know who that person is, because the battles of the 21st century are much more about what I call human rights as opposed to civil rights. You know, I think that we solve the problem of who is a citizen, except for obviously the question of immigration. But the question of first-class or second-class citizenship, I think we've kind of got past the notion that you can have second-class citizens. But the question for many people in the world is what happens when I cross a national border? What happens when I pursue opportunities elsewhere? We live in a global world. We're competing with people in many different parts of the world. So I think that the movements of the 21st century are going to be about what rights do we have as a human citizen of the world? And that's a difficult process to take place.
Dr. Carson, you've had a great seated history to watch things unfold, seeing the I Have a Dream speech in 1963, selected by Coretta Scott King in 1985 to edit and publish Dr. King's works. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.